Hello and welcome to another episode of Virtual Legality. I'm your host, Richard Hoeg, managing member of the Hoeg Law business law firm of Northville, Michigan. And Animal Crossing. If there's one thing that we can all rely on in 2020, it is the ability to go and visit our animal friends on our favorite island on the Nintendo Switch. And it's not just me who says this. In fact, Animal Crossing has sold 26 million copies on the Nintendo Switch since its release earlier this year. It is, bar none, one of Nintendo's biggest successes of the generation. I believe it's currently slated to finish only second to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which has sold almost 30 million copies and might well finish above it. But also along with Animal Crossing's popularity and us all being locked in our houses in 2020, has come an interesting evolution of the user-generated content of Nintendo products and more specifically of Animal Crossing itself, including with the delivery of political messages and corporate messages. You've seen fashion companies and late-night talk shows be presented through Animal Crossing. You've seen Black Lives Matter and Free Hong Kong presented as part of the user-generated content in Animal Crossing. And most recently, you saw the Biden and Harris administration project itself into the world of Animal Crossing with an entirety of political fundraiser type things, get out the vote efforts, politics, posters, balloons. You've got a little Kamala and a little Joe Biden right there in Animal Crossing, and it hit as large as on places like CNN. Animal Crossing players can deck their virtual yards with Joe Biden campaign signs. But if you're at all familiar with the way Nintendo operates, and if you're in Virtual Legality, chances are that you probably already know that Nintendo was grading at the use of its family-friendly, animal-based product for these purposes. So it is no surprise that as of a couple of days ago, they put out the following post entitled, Animal Crossing New Horizons Usage Guidelines for Businesses and Organizations. Nintendo always titles their posts in the most innocuous corporate way possible. Doesn't actually says what this does, but I can assure you that what it does is says none of this is good. As Michael Jordan used to say, Republicans buy sneakers too. Nintendo doesn't want to be in the business of politics or corporate messaging really at all. And so they have tried to devise a way to say, yes, please keep buying Animal Crossing. We really don't mind the extra media coverage or advertising, but we don't want you to use it in really any of the ways that we have seen it be used over the past 6 months. Now, before we dive into the nature of this document, I do want to relate it to a video that I just did late last week in which Nintendo shut down a Super Smash Bros. Tournament site called The Big House because they were using an emulator and a code injection technique that Nintendo didn't like, whether or not it was legal or illegal. And I commented on that as well as on a ban that they put forth by striking a streamer on Twitch for streaming Age of Calamity, what I framed in that video as before release here in the United States, but as a number of you have told me, was after official release in Australia. And as part of that discussion, I said, well, Nintendo has done this thing where they have put special rules in blog posts, but haven't actually changed the license that you receive for the software, such that they can take whatever step that they like from a legal perspective and not run afoul of what amounts to ineffective advisory opinions. Now, I also said you could probably use things like this blog post for, in this case, video sharing in respect of the Age of Calamity ban and say, hey, look, it was officially released in Australia. I was playing it legitimately, and maybe go to a court or go to a judge and say, Nintendo gave me this permission regardless of what the license says and regardless of the fact that the license says that Nintendo reserves all other rights in and to itself. But from this framework, we can now take a look at what Nintendo has done here and see that it doesn't change the underlying license. So even the permissions given here to businesses and organizations, which you might not think applies to you, but if you're a streamer or an influencer, you probably have at least a single member limited liability company in place, if not a bigger institution, or are working for a larger organization. Certainly if you were to consult with tax counsel or legal counsel, there are many instances where even as a small-time streamer or YouTuber, you might otherwise be inclined to make a small corporate entity for yourself. This will now apply to you, and whatever uses you might have for Animal Crossing that you might think are innocuous in the back of your head. A late night talk show, some other kind of thing that, yes, uses Animal Crossing and promotes your personality, but might also run afoul of these rules and might certainly run afoul of the underlying license that says personal use only. So with that as the background, let's dive in. Let's take a look at the language that they have actually put forth as of last week and note a couple of things, right? November 19th, 2020. One of the interesting things about that is, as we highlighted as part of this video, the Biden campaign was using Animal Crossing pretty extensively. It got a lot of coverage around United States media for using Animal Crossing in this way. And certainly as we proceed from 2020 onward into the metaverse that Tim Sweeney and Epic Games wants to put forth in Fortnite, and other user-generated content that continues to be such a big part of video gamers and just people's lives, we can expect to see more and more of this, and corporations and campaigns and other large entities pushing the boundaries of what these games can do. It's worth noting that Nintendo didn't act until well after the United States campaign was over, ? Obviously, there's a lot of controversy around that. Here in the United States, I don't want to talk about any of those specific details right now, but at least Election Day itself is over, and it's only now that Nintendo is moving. And one thing I would say about that from a corporate lawyer's perspective is that I have no doubt that Nintendo didn't like seeing its game and brand used this way. They just, as a corporate entity, don't tend to like those kinds of things. But I also think they didn't want to move on it in any respect that looked like they were changing any aspect of the United States election. So once the Biden campaign did that, they said, all right, we're not going to do this until mid-November at the earliest. And November 19th is about as early as they could have possibly put this forth to say, hey, people, don't use our game in that respect. And of course, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Hong Kong freedom movement, all of these various things are potentially even more contentious than just a United States presidential election. And Nintendo wants to sell you Mario, and they want to sell you Tom Nook, and they want to sell you all these various things and not engage with these aspects. And I know a number of you will come into my comments and say, oh, video games are all political all the time. And while I can certainly empathize with your position, I don't personally agree with it. And even if I did, I would note that Nintendo and Mario and Hyrule Warriors, Age of Calamity, and Animal Crossing certainly don't bear the same patina of politicization that the Ubisoft games like, say, Watch Dogs Legion do, where they're talking specifically about resistance and rebellion and strongman politics and things along those lines. So there is a varying level of gradient here, and if Nintendo wants to say we don't want to be involved in that conversation, it's their right to do so. And if you want to say they shouldn't say that, it's your right to do so as well. Now, we deeply appreciate that so many people around the world are having fun with Animal Crossing New Horizons for Nintendo Switch. Thank you for your support and for helping us build such a wonderful community. We talked about this last week, but always look out when corporate starts out with a thank you or a we love how much you love us kind of statement, because it does mean that the other shoe is about to fall. While our services and products are generally for personal use only, we'd like to reaffirm, by the way, that our end user license agreement makes clear that it's only for personal use. We understand there may be situations in which businesses and organizations would like to use or reference the game in relation to their business. As such, we would like to share a few guidelines with those businesses, organizations, and anyone representing them to preserve the experience for the millions of people enjoying the game recreationally. Look, we know you have stuff to sell. We know you have ideas to deliver to the masses, but a lot of people got this game so that they could start to try to pay off their home loans to Tom Nook and just build a nice beach full of umbrellas. If we see your activity is not following these guidelines or is damaging or having bad influence on the community, we may ask you to stop such activity or usage of our contents and take appropriate actions, including prohibiting your future business usage of the game. We could cut off your license if we feel so inclined, so be careful. And not only that, if you actually look at this paragraph, it's not just following these guidelines, right? This blog post is presented as, hey, if you follow these rules, we're going to be fine with it. No. This sentence actually says, we can do this to you if you don't follow these guidelines, sure, or if we determine that it's damaging or having a bad influence on the community, which is another way of saying you have followed the guidelines and Nintendo itself has determined that it is one of these two things, damaging or having a bad influence, which means that just like we were talking about with respect to video sharing and not change the end user license agreement, because this doesn't change that license agreement, Nintendo uses a lot of words here, but from a legal perspective, if they decide they don't want you to be doing whatever it is that you are doing, even if you think you are complying with these rules, then Nintendo can say, nope, shut it down. And this, of course, was what they were finding with respect to the Big House and Super Smash Brothers and Slippy last week. Now, what are the rules? They say you can do these following things. You can provide your custom design or dream address to other players. You can make a little thing in Animal Crossing. You can share it with folks. That is, of course, an already supported function of the game. It's not really a give from Nintendo, and you wouldn't expect any gives from Nintendo, as you saw from the previous paragraphs. You can invite other people to your island. Of course you can. And you can upload screenshots or game footage to family-friendly websites and social networking services. However, don't do any of these bullets here. Do not engage in activities that go beyond the E for Everyone rating. Do not have vulgar, discriminatory, or offensive content. Please refrain from bringing politics into the game. And now politics is pretty obviously, the Biden campaign. But is politics Free Hong Kong? Probably. Is politics Black Lives Matter? Probably. Is politics anything else that you might say that could have any kind of political impact anywhere in the world? Probably. And more importantly to Nintendo, they reserve the right to determine when something is politics and say, hey, you're violating this because you didn't refrain from bringing it into the game. Also, please do not share false information about the game or deceive others while using the game. In the parenthetical, they said, don't pretend that you are licensed or approved by Nintendo. That's fair, but otherwise, I don't understand what exactly they're trying to target with false information about the game, other than to suggest maybe that Nintendo is endorsing Joe Biden for president or something along those lines, that you can't make those efforts. And maybe if you're really trying to be legally compliant, you should have some kind of disclaimer. I don't know whether you write that on the ground using the techniques that Animal Crossing affords you, that you say, hey, just so we're clear, this isn't Nintendo, this is just the Biden campaign. Obviously, the Biden campaign is not supposed to be involved in Animal Crossing anymore, but if we assume that these had been in place and allowed politics, that's the kind of thing I would expect for more and more even corporate islands to have in there, saying, hey, just to be clear, this is not endorsed by Nintendo because we don't want Nintendo to take any negative actions against us. Now we have a big one. Please do not leverage the game as a marketing platform that directs people to activities or campaigns outside the game, including directing people to a sales page, distributing coupons, sweepstakes giveaways, requiring consumers to follow social network services accounts, gathering customers' information, or other invitational activities. Now, certainly that would include things like the Biden campaign saying, hey, come check out our website for more information, or even registering to vote is really a solicitation to do an activity, is an invitational activity. And Nintendo just doesn't want to be involved in these kinds of things. More specifically, this is aimed at corporations. You saw some fashion brands get in there and try to tell people that this fashion brand is great and that you could potentially check out this brand elsewhere online because they have things to sell in real life and not just at the Able Sisters. And Nintendo doesn't want to be doing that, not because that particular instance is bad in general, but because Nintendo is more risk averse than other corporations and say, hey, there is a possibility that somebody could send you to a really dark place on the internet, could connect Nintendo with something that we don't want to be connected with. And more important than anything, even the sales of Animal Crossing right now is making sure that the Nintendo goodwill and brand value is preserved so that they don't get sent to something that is defrauding people, that is taking their money, is associating Mario or even just the Animal Crossing brand just through a link out to something nefarious, obscene, vulgar, or that Nintendo just doesn't like out there on the internet. Finally, they say you are not allowed to obtain any financial benefit from using the game, including selling your custom design or earning any advertising revenue with the game content. Now, this is an important flag, right? Because people are, of course, streaming Animal Crossing, streaming Nintendo games. This is an important flag because this blog post applies only to businesses and organizations and not to individuals. When you get to the end of this, you see, for information regarding the monetization of videos using gameplay footage done by individual consumers, please see those content guidelines that we, of course, talked about last week. But it's still important to note that now that this exists in connection with the individual monetization rights, it would appear to create a legal morass where if you are an influencer of a decent size and you have put together a single member LLC or something else to try to insulate you from various legal or tax problems and have done it on the advice of counsel, Nintendo would appear to be suggesting that if you are in that particular organization, you can't use their blanket right to stream things, and so you really only have to be acting as an individual. Now, do I think Nintendo would ever enforce it in that manner? No, I really don't. But again, this policy of taking an end user license agreement, the actual legal right to do things, not giving you the rights that you need, and instead trying to give you largesse, your buy or leave permissions in blog posts after the fact, creates all of this exposure for people that are otherwise doing the marketing for Nintendo. And I would just see this kind of relationship between these documents, and certainly between influencers and streamers and Nintendo, be changed, because this isn't fair really to anybody. They also reserve the right in this paragraph before that final paragraph to revise this message as the community changes. We could change this whenever we like, so don't depend on it. If you are interested in distributing your custom designs or other activities in relation with your business, please refer to the latest version of this. Check it every time. Please be aware that any applicable Nintendo Switch Nintendo account agreements continue to apply. Any business use of the game that exceeds the rules set forth herein shall be permitted only with the separate and express written permission of Nintendo. So Nintendo is trying to lay down the law here. You can only invite people to your island and share your design, basically. You can also put screenshots and game footage on family-friendly sites. We can change this whenever we want. And here's the kicker. Please be aware that the Switch and account agreements continue to apply. So if you go and you look at what we were just talking about, the Switch agreement for software usable on the Switch says what we talked about last week. It's licensed, not sold, for your personal non-commercial use. You may not publish, copy, modify, reverse engineer, lease, rent, decompile, disassemble, distribute, offer for sale, or create derivative works or any portion of the software, or bypass, modify, defeat, tamper with, or circumvent any of the functions or protections of the console, unless otherwise permitted by law. You can't do anything that is not personal or non-commercial. So at its baseline level, when you look at the actual end user license agreement for what you purchased when you purchased a copy of Animal Crossing, McDonald's or Fashion Brand or Biden campaign, it says you can't do this anyway because that's not personal, non-commercial use. Then when you actually bring in the Nintendo account user agreement, it actually gets a little bit worse. This says that the account services under this document includes the software, video games, and add-on content that are playable on your console. Nintendo grants you that non-exclusive, non-transferable, revocable license to use the Nintendo account services solely for your personal and non-commercial use, as we just talked about. It also says the following that businesses should be aware of. By accepting this agreement, you give Nintendo permission to use and change your user-generated content in any way and for any purpose for free. And more specifically, you grant Nintendo and its affiliates and subsidiaries a worldwide, royalty-free, irrevocable, perpetual, non-exclusive, and sublicensable license to use, reproduce, modify, adapt, publish, translate, distribute, perform, and display all or any portion of your user-generated content, and to incorporate your user-generated content in other works, in any form, media, or technology now known or later developed, including for promotional or marketing purposes without any payment to you. So businesses, what you should really be aware of is not just that your Animal Crossing license could be taken away, but also that anything that you put in there, Nintendo reserves the right to use, reproduce, modify, adapt, publish, translate, distribute, perform, and display for any purpose on any technology now known or later developed. So if you're a business, you should be cautious about terms like this, but it does in fact get even a little bit more worse. Nintendo Code of Conduct, Section 11. To help keep the Nintendo account services friendly for all users, you agree that you will adhere to Nintendo's Code of Conduct found here. So now remember, what we've got here is we've got these business usage guidelines that say the Switch and account agreements continue to apply. Then we find ourselves in the account agreement and we see that the Code of Conduct is incorporated by reference. So the Code of Conduct itself directly applies by express reference in what Nintendo has just said to these businesses, in which Nintendo says you will not engage in any commercial activity using the service or any other activity that disrupts, diminishes the quality of, interferes with the performance of, or impairs the functionality of a service or any services of our third-party partners. So you won't engage in commercial activity. That is black letter rule that is incorporated and Nintendo doesn't get you out of, even with this new blog post from a couple of days ago. And Nintendo also reserves the right to just determine that you have diminished the quality of Animal Crossing by your presence. And Nintendo could just say, you are out. Or otherwise, that you violated our code of conduct, the Nintendo account rules, you violated your end user license agreement, and all this stuff, regardless of what a blog post from 3 days ago says. Finally, in that code of conduct, they also say that you will not upload, post, email, transmit, or otherwise make available any unsolicited or unauthorized advertising or promotional materials. So if nobody solicited from you promotional materials for your fashion brand or for your fast food joint or for your political campaign or for something else, then you are in violation of the code of conduct, which means you are in violation of your Nintendo account rules, which means you're in violation of your license agreement, which means that regardless of whether or not you are a business and you are trying to follow all of what is put forth in this blog post, you're in violation here, and Nintendo can do or choose not to do anything that they want against you. Which leads me to one of my primary points in virtual legality that we talked about absolutely with respect to the shutdown of the big house, and that is, this is no way to run a railroad. To have a baseline rule that looks like this and then to modify it with blog posts from 2018 and now 2020 that by their own terms reserve the right to apply everything in the baseline legal documents to your detriment. That everybody involved with these various licenses should look at the Nintendos of the world. And Nintendo is not the only company that does this kind of thing and say, this is unacceptable. If you believe that streaming is helping your sales, is helping Animal Crossing get out there, or is helping Super Smash Bros. Get out there, or any other game publisher believes that streaming is an overall good, and it is clear that they do, then we need to get rid of this largesse by your leave. Hey, it's not really expressly permitted, so we can still do anything against you if you rub us the wrong way, but also have these blog posts that you can turn to and think that they protect you. That is no way for this relationship to operate, and unfortunately, Nintendo keeps putting out example after example of the wrong way to do things. This has been Virtual Legality for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, we're coming up on the second anniversary of Virtual Legality in 4 days. We just hit 28,000 subscribers. We'd love to have that number be even higher. Tell your friends, like, share, subscribe, ring bells. We are more than happy to have great conversations with all of the new folks that have come in talking about Super Smash Brothers or various political issues with us in this space. Thank you so much for joining us. If you caught this on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. And if you listen to it as a podcast, thank you so much for listening. And I will catch you on the very next episode of Virtual Legality. Virtual Legality is a YouTube video series with audio podcast versions presented as commentary and for education and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you have legal questions about the topics discussed, please consult your own legal counsel.